Okay, so I know it's been a while since we've done this, and our last video I think left off on like version 2, Vendure version 2.2 or whatever, and now Vendure's like release another series of their open source under a different license, under the Vendure 3 series with added security and things like that. So I think if we're going to jump back into these videos, we're just going to start fresh instead of building off anything that was before. I'm sure nobody remembers anything before anyway, since it's been such a long time, but I think this will be good to just kind of start fresh. So at this point, let's just start from scratch. We have a very vanilla Vendure opened up here. We have version 3.1.1 at the time of this video. Let's try. The only thing I've ran up to this point is just npx. This command is available in the docs as well. Npx Vendure create, and then I created the shop test shop, and I just connected to the basic SQLite database, and we'll go over how to connect to the Postgres database in the future in the next video if that's something that you're interested in. But just maybe we can cruise through these just a little bit. I don't want to spend too much time, but we just have some basic data that gets generated. We have our super admin, we have some images that got created, and let's see, there should be some users, some products. I did opt for some dummy products, so we have some products in here, some product images, product variants. And if you don't know what these are, it's not important at this time. Just to get an idea, this is what you're kind of loaded with. We have our super admin user, and we'll go through some of the existing mutations as we work through some examples. I think that will be helpful. Okay, so what are we going to do today? Let's create a plugin, and I don't know what it's going to do yet. Maybe we'll just do like a Hello World plugin just to get started. And Vendure has done really well with their CLI. Actually, I think it's just npx Vendure. Let's see. Yep. They did a really good job with this CLI. It's very easy to just add a plugin, add a service, add an API, create a new entity, like all these things, just make it super easy. We're just going to start off with just a basic plugin. It's going to add a plugin into this folder here, which is currently empty. And maybe we can go through some testing setup as well, because that is important. I've generally used Vitest for testing, so maybe we can run some tests on our plugin. In any case, let's name this plugin. What do we want to do? We're just going to return hello world, right? So let's just do hello. The hello plugin. Hello. Must be lowercase and contain only. Okay. Plugin options. That's a good location. Alright. Okay, inside this, we definitely want a service. Let's see what it generated so far. Generate some constants, which we can use to pass in our plugin options. Types, which are going to connect the plugin options. Then we have our bare bones plugin folder here. Every plugin is going to import is going to basically depend on this plugin common module. And so it does say it should be imported into plugins to avoid boilerplate duplication. I guess I want to cover just maybe briefly what was created. So the plugin options are generally customizable if you need to pass in some stuff during initialization, or if you want someone else to be able to use the plugin. Maybe it requires an API key from external source. You're not going to embed that directly into the plugin. That's something that would be passed into the initialization function for whoever's actually using it. And if we wanted to pass in an API key, let's say we do, we could simply, so you could pass, I guess there's a few, you could pass it as a different parameter. You can assign it here if you want to, but if we're going to pass it in, let's just modify these plugin init options. So we'll just, what do we call it? Google API key. And then that takes that in. That's assigned there. And then the options is going to use a symbolic link, which is defined in our constants here. And then we should be able to inject this into our service file and access those options, and we can use them however we want. So in those few seconds, we just added the ability to, just by modifying this, we now have the ability to pass in a Google API key through the existing options parameter. Okay, what's next here? So Vendure ships with two basic endpoints. There's the shop API and the admin API. And maybe before we do this, let's just run this. I feel like I skipped a whole bunch of steps here. And the point of these videos is not to really assume that you know anything about Vendure. So let's break down some of this stuff here. So when we run the server, you'll notice that it points out the version that we're running, and then we're running on a port, obviously. So we can actually go into here, and this is our Vendure server. By default, you'll have super admin as the user and the password, just like that. Now we're in. So now we have a bunch of stuff running locally on our machine. And then the other thing that we'll have access to is this admin API endpoint, which we can play around with. We can call all these functions, all these mutations. If we want to register a user, maybe that function only exists on my. So admin API. Let's go to the shop API. Login, and this is where we pass in the user's email and password input. And then the other endpoints that we'll have access to are going to be the asset server. For my past use cases, we've ran a separate asset server, so we actually haven't been using this. The development mailbox has been useful. The mailbox is useful. This is basically event-driven, like email notifications that get sent out to users. Oh, I realize it might have been cut off here. So this is the email page, and I have some options here. This is what I just referred to, and we'll go through how to create, not options, events that are currently shipped. We can generate tests for each event, and then it will create the email. Alright, the next thing that we're going to go to is we're going to try to finish up our plugin real quick. Alright, so we created a plugin. We're going to, inside this plugin, we're going to basically have an API, extend the shop API so that we can ping our backend anytime we want to say hello to someone. Very basic plugin introduction. And we were in the process of Vendure, and we're in the process of creating our service file here. We're going to add it to, we can select which plugin we want to add this service file to, which we only have one, so we're just going to select that. We can have it pre-fill with some basic CRUD operations on an entity, which we're not going to do. We're just going to have a basic service, and it's going to be called just my service is okay. Okay, let's open up the service, and we have an example method that got generated, and we see that the plugin options are injected, so we do have access to those, to that Google API key if we do want to use it for anything. Here's our example method, and we're just going to rename this to like hello world message, and we're not going to pass in any ID, so we're not going to do this right now. What we're going to do is just return a message, thank you Copilot. So it's hello world, and maybe we'll even like show, I want to show something here. I want to show you that this context is a gift from Vendure. I would say it's imported, this request context type is imported from Vendure core, and it comes with a lot of useful things. Let's see if we can, I forget what happens here. Let's just check that out. We'll return hello world. So we have like a logic function. So the service file is intended to hold logic, and what we need now is a way to connect it to like the public to access it. So we need an endpoint, and once again let's turn to Vendure's nifty CLI here, and we'll add an API endpoint. This is the business logic we're going to extend. Name for the new query. We're just going to call it hello world. We'll call it get hello world message. Name for a new mutation. We don't need a mutation. I don't know what happens if we just leave it undefined. Okay, so it recreated a function in the service file. It's going to do that. We're going to erase that. And it also created an API directory with API extensions, and we're going to rename these extensions. I don't like how it names those. And an extension resolver, so it's going to resolve the APIs that we just created. So let's make some adjustments here. Our get hello world is not going to take any parameters. It's going to return a string, not a boolean. It's going to extend type query. Are we extending the admin API or the shop API? Why did it not ask me? Yeah, it's assuming we're sending the admin API. So let's change this. This is a good practice, I suppose. We're going to extend the shop API. I'm going to rename this in just a second here. And we're going to call it, I always like to call it like the endpoint extensions. So shop API extensions, and then admin API extensions. I don't like naming it after the plugin, because then it gets confusing as if there's another endpoint. We're going to get rid of this, and we're just going to extend the shop API with a get hello world message. Inside the resolver, I guess it can be called whatever you want, but we just are going to not avoid confusion, and we're going to call it my shop. We don't need any input arguments coming in, and the return value will be a string. Get rid of this. And this says the super admin can only call this, but this doesn't make sense on the shop API. I don't think you can authenticate as a super admin on the shop API. I actually don't know, but we could try it, I suppose, and see what happens. Let's just see if it blocks it or not. Query, we can, if we define something different for our API extension, we can define it in here so that it lines up, but I think we named it the exact same thing, so it should link up correctly. I prefer to do this since it makes it easier to debug if something goes wrong. Okay, where are we at? So we have our API extension. This will get called, it will get resolved to our service function, and then we will log out the context object, and then we'll return hello world. And that should be returned in the string, which is returned in the string of the resolver. And we just need to adjust this plugin so that we have the right schema being imported here. Where are we at? Oops. Export that. Shop API extension. Resolver is going to be, we renamed it to my shop resolver. And then the other thing that was added, you might not have noticed, is the service file is added in the providers section. This is all stuff that is Nest.js. So if there is questions about it, which actually I did have questions about it too. When I was kind of learning, I was trying to figure out what is Vendure, what is not Vendure. So if you do have doubts about this, just know that this is all basically Nest.js, and the only Vendure specific stuff we're using is coming from like the Vendure core. So anything coming from there is where you can draw the line, I would say. Okay, what is next? We have an API. Okay, the next thing we need to do is we need to generate. Now they made some updates on this, so I could be out of the loop here. We used to have to generate the GraphQL types ourselves. I still think we might have to do that, but I remember there was an update, there was a notice about that, and so I might double check real quick. Are we ready to test though? Let's see. I think we are. We have it linked up in our plugin. Oh, we're not initializing our plugin in our Vendure config. I didn't discuss this file, but we can discuss it maybe later on. This is the main file, so the Vendure config file is something that is generated with the project when you create your Vendure project, and it basically defines a lot of the configurations of how your project is going to run. If you wanted to connect to a different database, your authentication options, if you want to mess with those, your API stuff is server port that you run on, and then our plugins. We have a bunch of plugins that are just initialized by default. And then it looks like when we created our plugin, it was actually added to our Vendure config file. Okay, so let's run this and let's see what happens with the inputs. I don't think it's going to get generated. What do we call it? Get hello world message. Interesting, so it did get generated. How did they do that? I'm using an old version of Vendure on my other project, so I need that feature because I have like a code gen file and I'm manually generating my types. Anyways, I'll circle back to that and try to figure that out. We can discuss that in the next one. Okay, so whatever, it generated our function, so let's see what happens if we try to call it here. It's going to be a query. We're going to query the get hello world message. Takes no inputs. It should just return, or should ping this endpoint. I didn't think you could. I forget where I saw the structure of this context. It's somewhere, maybe. Yeah, I think I was just looking at this possibly. Get the channel ID, currency codes, active user ID, if they are authorized, all these things that are added to this context that are very useful. Okay, let's try again here. Let's clear this output so we can see fresh. Oh, I didn't save it. I didn't save the file. Let's try again here. Let's get a nice solid refresh. There we go. Hello world. Alright, that was, I think, I want to try to keep these videos short, so that's a good starting point. I think in the next one we'll try to expand a little bit more. But for now, let's try to get back into these little short tutorials on Vendure. Since it's such a great open source project, I want to try to share it with more people and hopefully get you through some of the learning pain points that I went through. Alright, we'll see you in the next one.